911 emergency.
We need him. Police.
What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old.
There are crimes that linger long after the world tries to forget them. Cases that sit like a shadow across an entire nation. Crimes that refuse to fade, that dig into the collective mind and stay there as an open wound. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey is one of those cases. A crime that shouldn't have been complicated. A crime that should have been solved within days. Yet here we are, decades later, still circling the same unanswered question. Who killed a 6-year-old girl inside her own home on a night that should have been filled with nothing but holiday warmth? Her name still strikes a nerve. A child of beauty pageants, a sparkly presence on stage, adored by judges, cameras, in the small world she lived in. People knew her face even before they knew her story. And once they learned her story, her face became something else entirely. A symbol of a tragedy wrapped in confusion, mishandling, and unanswered questions. It began inside a home that most people would consider a dream. A large house in Boulder, Colorado, decorated for Christmas, filled with the echoes of laughter from the previous night's celebrations. A picture-perfect family scene frozen in time. But on the morning of December 26th, everything ruptured. That rupture began not with a scream, not with the discovery of a body, but with a single sheet of paper lying on a staircase. A ransom note that would go on to become one of the most dissected documents in investigative history. Imagine Patsy Ramsey descending the stairs, her mind still clouded with morning fog, expecting the ordinary tasks of the day, leftover wrapping paper, preparing breakfast, maybe cleaning up the last bits of holiday clutter. And then her eyes land on a letter placed so precisely on the steps that it demands attention. She picks it up, reads the first lines, and instantly her world collapses beneath her. The note claims her daughter has been kidnapped. It demands money, an oddly specific amount, too specific, the same amount her husband received as a bonus. The note rambles, adopting a tone that sounds more like a movie script than the cold, concise instructions kidnappers usually leave. It names fictional groups. It exaggerates threats. It warns them not to call the police. And yet the note itself feels theatrical, almost artificial, like it was written by someone who had seen too many crime films and thought this was how a ransom message should read. Patsy screams. Her panic echoes through the house. In those few chaotic moments, everything starts unraveling. She calls 911. She calls friends. She calls neighbors. And though she doesn't realize it, every name she dials becomes the first nail in the coffin of the investigation that's about to follow. Within minutes, the Ramsey home fills with people. Friends rushing to comfort the family. Neighbors stepping inside, trying to help in any way they can. A pastor arriving for emotional support. Dozens of footsteps wandering through corridors, touching surfaces, moving items instinctively. Each person unknowingly destroys pieces of evidence that investigators will desperately need later. By the time law enforcement arrives, the home, the crime scene, is already contaminated beyond recovery. Instead of being treated like a fragile vault of clues, it has become a gathering place. A place where emotions rule over procedure. For hours, the house buzzes with movement. Officers search casually but without urgency, still believing this is a kidnapping. They look around the house, but not with the focus required for a homicide investigation. They trust the ransom note. They operate under its instructions. They assume JonBenet is alive somewhere, and that searching aggressively might endanger her. But then everything changes in one shocking moment. John Ramsey, accompanied by a family friend, goes into the basement, an area police hadn't thoroughly inspected. A small, dim storage room stands at the back. The door is closed. He opens it, and inside lies the body of his 6-year-old daughter, covered with a blanket, her hands tied, a garrote still around her neck. That single discovery transforms the case instantly. The kidnapping narrative collapses, the ransom note becomes suspicious, and the investigation, which should have started as a homicide from the first minute, is now several hours behind, hours that sealed its fate. John lifts his daughter's body, carries her upstairs, lays her on the floor, tries to save her even though she's already gone. To a father, it's instinct. To investigators, it's an irreversible blow to the evidence. Fibers transfer, bodily fluids shift. The crime scene is altered in ways no detective can undo. From here, what follows is not just a search for a killer. It becomes a story of missteps, miscommunication, and mishandling so severe that solving the case becomes nearly impossible. Why was JonBenét's body inside the house if this was a kidnapping? Why hide it in a basement room instead of taking her away? Why write a ransom note after the child was already dead? What kind of kidnapper plans a long, theatrical message but leaves the victim behind? Every question brings its own contradiction. Nothing aligns with normal criminal behavior. And then comes the most chilling realization of all. Whoever killed her felt comfortable enough to stay inside the house for an extended period of time. Enough time to write a 3-page note, enough time to move through multiple rooms without fear, enough time to stage something. That level of confidence narrows down suspects drastically. Strangers do not linger. Strangers do not write essays on notepads belonging to the family they're violating. Strangers don't wander into basement storage rooms unless they know the house intimately. But as investigators begin to see these patterns, they're also burdened with a crime scene that's been corrupted. Footprints are useless. Fingerprints are useless. Movements are impossible to trace. What could have been clear becomes murky. Investigators turn their focus inward, toward the family. It's the statistical approach. Most young children who are harmed by someone close to them. But statistics are not truth. Statistics are merely probability, and probability alone cannot put someone in prison. Still, the clues seem to be pointing inside the walls of that house. The ransom note becomes a central piece. Investigators study it obsessively. Who writes a 3-page ransom letter? Who quotes movies in a note? Who sits comfortably in a stranger's home long enough to think of dramatic threats? Handwriting experts examine Patsy's writing. Some find similarities in the way she forms certain letters. Others find differences. Some say she could have disguised her handwriting. Others say it's not a match at all. No consensus. Only arguments. John's behavior becomes a topic of debate. To some, he seems too composed. To others, he appears appropriately shattered. But behavior is not evidence. And treating it like evidence leads to dangerous assumptions. Their son, Burke, remains in the background, barely questioned. Shielded by lawyers and family counselors. People whisper, speculate, build theories around him. But again, no evidence. Only suspicion, fueled by silence and imagination. The autopsy reveals even more complexity. A head injury severe enough to cause unconsciousness or death. Ligature marks that suggest strangulation. Other patterns that look like they could come from a stun gun, though even that becomes controversial as some experts disagree entirely. Each pathologist reads the report differently. Each interpretation conflicts with another. No single explanation accounts for everything. Then comes the DNA. On JonBenét's clothing, there is trace DNA from a male who is not part of the Ramsey family. The media seizes it as a breakthrough. But it is not that simple. The DNA is too small, too degraded, too easily contaminated. The clothing was handled by factory workers, retail employees, family members. The DNA is not in a place that proves a struggle, nor is it consistent enough to be definitive. Even DNA, the gold standard of modern justice, becomes a fog instead of a flashlight. Years pass and the case spirals into a circus. Every talk show, every documentary, every self-proclaimed expert fuels new theories. Some point to intruders, some to family members, some to the bizarre Santa impersonator who visited their home, some to local drifters. A school teacher even falsely confesses, sending investigators down a useless path. Every false lead further buries the truth. The investigation fractures. The public forms its own verdicts, and facts drown in the noise. Meanwhile, the core truth remains untouched. A child was murdered inside her house, in a room that wasn't thoroughly searched after a note was written using the family's own supplies, in a timeline that makes no sense for a professional kidnapper. Then there is the basement room, the most haunting location in the entire case. A small space, cold and isolated, it feels like a place chosen deliberately. A place that required familiarity. Someone knew that room existed. Someone knew what was inside. Someone wasn't afraid of walking into it in the dark. That room is the silent witness of everything. It holds the unspoken truth. The problem is, the truth was contaminated before experts even touched it. The longer the case stays open, the more theories multiply. Some investigators believe it was an accident, a sudden moment of anger or mistake covered up to protect someone. Others believe it was a deliberate act by an outsider. Others claim the crime scene was staged to mislead detectives into chasing the wrong story. None of these theories are complete. Every version leaves gaps. Every theory contradicts at least one piece of evidence. And that is the tragedy of the case. Every clue has a shadow attached. Every fact has an exception. Every observation has a counter-argument. What should have been straightforward becomes a maze with no exit. The media keeps resurfacing the case, promising revelations that never arrive. New investigators inherit the file and try to fix the damage their predecessors made, but you cannot repair a crime scene that was destroyed on the very first day. You cannot build a house on a broken foundation. You can only keep circling the ruins, and the ruins of this case are extensive. The ransom note, too long, too detailed, too theatrical. The broken timeline, too many contradictions. The family dynamic, too secretive and lawyer-controlled. The evidence, too contaminated. The interviews, too delayed. The basement room, too suspicious. The autopsy, too ambiguous. The DNA, too unclear. The theories, too fragmented. All of these form a tangle impossible to fully unravel. What makes this case even more haunting is the emotional contrast. A beautiful child smiling in pageant videos, dressed in sequins, performing on brightly lit stages. And then the image of that same child found lifeless in a cold, dark basement. That contrast sears itself into the public mind. Her pageant videos outlive her. Her smiles, now haunting, circulate endlessly. Her death didn't just take a child from a family. It took away the innocence of an entire community. Boulder was never the same after that day. The Ramsey family was never the same. The country watched, horrified, but fascinated. And JonBenét became something she never should have become, a permanent icon of unresolved tragedy. The hardest truth is this: the case was solvable. Everything that should have led to an answer was there. The clues existed. The evidence existed. The timeline existed. But those first few hours, the ones that matter most, were completely lost. A house full of people. Evidence handled by dozens of hands. A body moved. Rooms cleaned. Details forgotten. Memories altered. Stories influenced by lawyers. Investigative focus turned political. Media pressure drowning objectivity. Every misstep closing a door forever. By the time the world truly cared, the truth had already slipped away. Even now, decades later, we are left with fragments. Broken pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. The killer, whether someone inside that house or someone who entered unknown, walked away without consequences. Somewhere, someone knows the truth. Whether that person is living freely, or whether the truth lies buried within the minds of those who were there that night, is something nobody can say with certainty. But one thing remains undeniable. The crime scene was not the basement, not the staircase, not the bedroom. The real crime scene was the chaos that unfolded afterward. The collapse of procedure, the rush of emotion, the contamination of everything that mattered. That is why this case remains frozen. That is why no theory feels complete. That is why JonBenét Ramsey's murder became one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. Her killer is out there, perhaps sitting in silence, perhaps long gone, perhaps someone people still speak to without knowing the truth that lies beneath their smile. Time cannot solve what was broken at the start, and because of that, JonBenét's voice, silenced so young, still echoes, not through words, but through the endless question everyone continues to ask. Why wasn't this case solved? And the world continues to stare into the void, searching for a truth that was lost long before anyone realized what was truly happening. The question hangs in the air because it was never answered when it mattered. Instead of solving a crime, the investigation became a fight between narratives. A fight between law enforcement departments arguing over jurisdiction, a fight between media outlets competing for the most sensational angle, a fight between experts interpreting the same evidence in opposite ways, a fight between public opinion and actual facts, a fight between speculation and silence. While the world argued, the truth remained buried under the noise. When investigators tried to reconstruct the final hours of JonBenet's life, they found themselves confronting a story filled with contradictions. The Ramsey family insisted the night had been calm. They had attended a Christmas party, returned home, put the children to bed. But the timing was unclear. Memories clashed. Statements shifted slightly each time they were retold. Not intentionally, perhaps. Shock can etch confusion into the mind. But to investigators, inconsistencies are not just inconsistencies. They are openings, places where truth or deception can hide. The question of when JonBenet was last seen alive became one of the first cracks in the foundation. Some believed she had fallen asleep on the ride home. Others believed she was awake when they arrived. Those details seem small, but in a case where a few minutes can change the entire narrative, every detail matters. Then there was the question of what happened inside the kitchen that night. Some investigators believed JonBenet may have eaten pineapple close to the time of her death, based on stomach contents. The problem? Her parents claimed they never served her pineapple, but there it was, a bowl of pineapple sitting on the kitchen table when officers arrived, with fingerprints belonging to both John and Burke Ramsey. Was it innocent? Probably. Families don't track every snack a child eats. But in a case like this, nothing is just innocent. Everything becomes a thread, and every thread leads somewhere unclear. The ransom note itself was not just suspicious, it was filled with strange details that seemed to mimic lines from movies. "We are a small foreign faction," a phrase that sounds like a poor imitation of a thriller rather than the words of real criminals. The final demand, 2 bags for the money, 1 for the cash, and 1 for the instruction, also echoed scenes from films investigators recognized. Too many coincidences, too many strange phrases, too much theatricality for a crime that should have been rooted in real fear and real urgency. But still, experts could not agree on who wrote it. Some pointed to the slant of letters, the way certain loops were made, the pressure of the pen strokes. They argued it resembled Patsy Ramsey's handwriting. Others argued the differences were too great, that no conclusion could be drawn. The more they studied, the deeper they sank into subjectivity. And the note, instead of serving as a clue, became another labyrinth. Then came the interviews, or rather the lack of them. The Ramsey family did not sit down for in-depth interviews immediately after the murder. They hired lawyers. They negotiated conditions. They insisted on time. And while some called this suspicious, others saw it as the natural reaction of wealthy individuals who felt under siege by the media. But that delay created yet another hole. Memories faded, stories hardened. The fluid truth turned solid, too solid to challenge. Investigators split into 2 camps. One believed the family was responsible, the other believed the family was innocent and the killer was an intruder. This division was devastating. It meant each side stopped listening to the other. Instead of working together, they worked against each other. They interpreted the same evidence differently, argued over conclusions, contradicted each other in the press. The cracks widened. The case weakened. As the years passed, the intruder theory became both stronger and weaker at the same time. Stronger because the DNA evidence, however small, did not match any family member. Weaker because the DNA evidence was so trace, so minimal, that contamination couldn't be ruled out. Stronger because an open basement window and a scuff mark suggested possible entry. Weaker because the window had been left open months earlier, and the mark could have come from a previous attempt to fix it. Stronger because some neighbors reported hearing strange sounds that night. Weaker because sound carries unpredictably, especially in winter. Every piece of evidence cut both ways. Even the garrote became a symbol of contradiction. Some investigators believed it was too sophisticated to be made in a rush by a family member panicking. Others believed it was amateurish, crude, the kind of weapons someone unfamiliar with violence would create. Some said the knots indicated someone with technical knowledge. Others said they were simple loops anyone could tie. The tool was both professional and unprofessional, depending on who examined it. Then there was the basement itself, a maze of rooms, corridors, low ceilings. The room where JonBenet was found was particularly strange. Bare concrete floors, small window, a space used for storage. It was not the first place a stranger would find unless he had explored the house extensively. And exploring a house extensively while committing a crime is extremely rare. Criminals rush, they panic, they flee. They do not wander calmly through unfamiliar basements searching for a specific room. But someone did. That detail continued haunting investigators. Whoever placed her in that room had the confidence and time to do so. That single fact alone suggested an unsettling possibility that the killer existed somewhere inside the house long before the crime, or that the killer walked those hallways without fear of being caught. That knowledge is what tears at the heart of the case. The psychological profile of the crime was equally divided. Some profilers believed it showed traits of personal anger. Someone who knew JonBenet, someone who lost control. Others argued it resembled a staged crime, something made to look like a kidnapping gone wrong. Still others saw signs of sexual motivation, a predatory act by a stranger who entered the home. But again, none of these profiles matched perfectly. Every theory contradicted something physical from the scene. There were too many layers, too many possibilities, too many interpretations. And the strangest part is this. If you step back from the noise and view the case from a distance, it seems like a story with a clear answer. A note written inside the house, a body hidden inside the house, a crime that required time and familiarity. It all points inward. But the deeper you dig, the more that clarity dissolves. New pieces emerge that don't fit the family theory. New clues lean toward an intruder, and both paths lead into dead ends. Investigators tried to follow movements around the neighborhood, reports of a strange man, reports of a van, reports of footsteps in the snow, or the lack of them. But even the weather data contradicted itself. Some said fresh snow covered the yard. Others said the ground was frozen but clear. Photographs showed patches of snow, not a blanket of it. Once again, nothing aligned with the simplicity that investigators needed. The more people studied the case, the more chaotic it became. The reward money drew out false confessors, people seeking attention, people with mental illness, people who wanted to insert themselves into a story that wasn't theirs. Each false confession burned investigators' time and resources. One man claimed he was with JonBenet when she died. Another claimed to know the killer. Another insisted he had been inside the Ramsey home. All lies, all distractions. And the cost of those distractions was enormous. Even the grand jury, which many believed would finally name a suspect, only deepened the confusion. They wanted to indict the Ramseys for child abuse resulting in death. Not murder, but neglect or cover-up. But the district attorney refused to sign the indictment, claiming the evidence wasn't strong enough for conviction. That decision split the community. Some saw it as protection of a wealthy family. Others saw it as the only responsible legal choice. Neither side could prove the other wrong. Public anger grew. Documentaries were produced, books published, journalists dedicated their careers to the story. Psychologists analyzed interviews, body language, expressions. And the more people speculated, the more the truth disappeared beneath layers of opinion. JonBenet became a symbol, not of what happened to her, but of what didn't happen after her death. She became the face of investigative failure, the face of media obsession, the face of a justice system that could not deliver justice even in the most heartbreaking of circumstances. Her pageant videos were replayed endlessly. At first, they showed a talented little girl full of energy. Later, they became eerie artifacts, images of a child smiling into a camera, unaware of the tragedy ahead. Those videos burned themselves into public memory. People began associating her with those images. Glitter, crowns, rehearsed routines. A tiny performer whose life was performed again and again in the public eye, even after she was gone. Children should grow into adults, not into myths. But JonBenet did not get that chance. And while the country turned her into a symbol, her family was trapped in a different kind of tragedy. Whether guilty or innocent, their lives were destroyed. Their home was no longer a home. It became a landmark of horror. The country turned against them. Strangers sent threats. Cameras followed them everywhere. Their grief became public property. Their silence was treated as guilt. Their every movement was inspected under a microscope. Even Burke Ramsey, who was only 9, became the subject of whispers and accusations that no child should ever face. And to this day, he carries the shadow of those suspicions despite never being charged with anything. Meanwhile, the intruder theory produced its own ghosts. A list of men with troubled histories, men who lived near the Ramseys, men who had criminal records, men who seemed strange enough to commit such a crime. Each one was investigated. Each one became a temporary villain in the public eye. But again, no one matched perfectly. No one had the right combination of motive, opportunity, and evidence. Every suspect failed to align with at least one major clue. The truth flickered like a candle in a storm, visible for a moment, then swallowed by wind. As time passed, investigators retired. Files grew dusty. Witnesses forgot details. The case evolved from an active investigation into a historical tragedy. Something discussed in textbooks, not courtrooms. The technology improved, DNA testing advanced. But the samples were too compromised to benefit. Forensic tools grew sharper, but the crime scene they were meant to examine was already destroyed long ago. You cannot decode a message if the ink has been smeared, and that is what this case became. A page where half the letters were erased on the first day. Every few years, a new documentary promised a revelation. A new investigator announced a breakthrough. A new analysis claimed to solve it. But every time, the truth slipped through the cracks. People debated each theory with the same intensity they always had, but nothing ever changed. Because the truth is no longer just hidden. It is fractured, scattered into pieces that cannot be reassembled. JonBenet's tragedy became a mirror, reflecting everything wrong with criminal investigations when chaos replaces procedure. A case where the first decision, calling people into the house, created consequences that rippled outward until nothing remained clear. Even now, when you walk through the corridors of what happened, you feel that something vital is missing, something that was there in those early hours but was lost forever because of panic, confusion, and the well-intentioned actions of people who didn't understand the importance of preserving the scene. The killer walked away in the silence created by that chaos. And while the world keeps looking for answers, one fact remains unchanged. The truth is still inside that house, but scattered in ways no one can ever put back together. What makes this case even more haunting is that every possible answer has a counter-argument that seems just as strong. Every time someone points toward the family, someone else points toward an intruder. Every time someone says the note is staged, someone else says the DNA proves an outsider. Every time someone argues the basement room indicates familiarity, someone else argues that intruders have hidden in stranger places before. It is a crime suspended between two worlds. The world inside the house and the world outside. And no matter how many times investigators tried to force the pieces together, the picture refused to form. One of the most unsettling questions revolves around the use of the garrote, a weapon that seems out of place in a domestic environment. Especially in a home filled with Christmas decorations and children's toys, it is a device that suggests intent, control, a deliberate, calculated act. But when examined closely, the knots also appear inconsistent with professional use, as if someone attempted to create something they had seen, not something they truly understood. That contradiction extends the confusion, a blend of amateur construction and deliberate cruelty. Then there's the broken window in the basement, the window that some investigators believed could have been an entry point, the window that John Ramsey claimed to have broken himself months earlier when he had locked himself out of the house. A detail that sounds innocent, but the question remains, was the window used that night? Was the suitcase found beneath it placed there by an intruder trying to climb out? Or had it been there all along? Every theory feels incomplete. Every scenario feels forced. The suitcase itself is another bizarre detail. too large to be overlooked, too strangely positioned, too heavy to belong neatly to an intruder's escape plan, yet too coincidental to be meaningless. And in this case, coincidences rarely feel like coincidences. Even the cobwebs around the window became sources of arguments. Some claimed they were undisturbed, proving no intruder came through. Others claimed they were torn or incomplete, proving someone passed by. The truth becomes unmeasurable when the scene has already been touched by so many hands and examined under so many conflicting interpretations. The neighborhood was interviewed extensively. Some neighbors claimed to hear a scream in the middle of the night. Others heard nothing. One neighbor described a light on in the kitchen long after the family claimed to be asleep. Another mentioned seeing a strange figure days earlier. But none of these sightings, none of these sounds could be verified. Humans misremember. Humans fill gaps. Humans want to contribute to cases that shake their community. And investigators learned long ago that eyewitness accounts can be unreliable, especially when fear and imagination are involved. The deeper anyone digs into this case, the more they understand how fragile truth becomes in chaos. And chaos defined that house on the morning of December 26th. Officers walked in and out. Friends comforted the Ramseys by cleaning, straightening, touching things, moving objects. Dozens of innocent acts that carried devastating consequences. One woman even began tidying the kitchen. Another took it upon herself to collect blankets. Someone else walked through the basement searching for clues. None of them intended harm, but harm was done. Forensic evidence is like a spider's web. Delicate, precise, easily destroyed. Once the threads are broken, the pattern disappears forever. And in the Ramsey home, those threads were torn apart almost instantly. And so the investigation turned to interviews. But even those were clouded. Patsy, distraught and overwhelmed, struggled through questions. John remained composed, choosing words carefully. Their answers were dissected by the world. When Patsy showed emotion, some called it theatrics. When she remained calm, some called it guilt. Grief behaves unpredictably, yet people acted as if there was only one correct way to mourn. The media took these interviews and carved narratives out of them. Some networks portrayed the Ramseys as cunning manipulators. Others portrayed them as victims of police incompetence. And while the world argued about their facial expressions, the real evidence lay neglected, fading into irretrievable fragments. Even years later, handwriting experts debated the ransom note with the same ferocity. One expert claimed the chances of Patsy not writing the note were 1 in millions. Another expert said confidently she did not write it. A third argued it was intentionally disguised, making analysis unreliable. If 3 top experts can interpret the same samples in completely different ways, how can the general public claim certainty? Meanwhile, the DNA sample, tiny, incomplete, possibly transferred during manufacturing, was treated like a miracle answer by some and like meaningless noise by others. It contained too little information to build a full profile, too little material to confirm anything with absolute certainty. Yet its presence fueled a decade-long tug-of-war between theories. One of the most disturbing possibilities investigated was sexual motivation. Some believed the nature of the injuries suggested an assault. Others disagreed entirely, arguing that the marks were inconsistent with sexual violence. Some believed the scene was staged to look like an assault. Others believed an actual assault occurred and was then covered up. The disagreement among experts was so intense that even professionals with decades of experience reached opposing conclusions. As the case unfolded, investigators faced another challenge: the political landscape of Boulder's justice system. There were clashes between the police department and the district attorney's office, disagreements over how aggressively to pursue the family, fear of public backlash, fear of wrongful accusations. And in the middle of this struggle was a murdered child whose justice depended on people setting aside their differences, but they did not. Instead, the case became a battlefield where egos collided, careers were shaped, and reputations were built or destroyed. Some officers wanted to pressure the Ramseys hard. Others believed pushing them would cause the investigation to crumble. Some prosecutors wanted to take the case to trial. Others feared they would lose and permanently close the door on the truth. No one fully agreed, no one worked as one team, And a divided investigation is often worse than no investigation at all. While adults argued, the mystery of what truly happened to JonBenet grew colder. The longer a case sits unsolved, the harder it becomes to solve. Witnesses forget, objects degrade, memories blur, people move on. And eventually all that remains are documents, recordings, and the unshakable fact that a 6-year-old child's story ended in an unthinkable way. Then there were the false leads. Endless, confusing, time-consuming. A drifter with a criminal history was interrogated but cleared. A family friend became a suspect briefly. A local man with a bizarre fascination with the case emerged years later and provided a false confession that led to an international chase. He was arrested, questioned, studied. But his story fell apart. His details didn't match. His timeline collapsed, and he joined the long list of people who had inserted themselves into a tragedy they had no real connection to. The more false leads appeared, the more investigators felt the case slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, across the world, people watched, forming their own theories from living rooms and internet forums. They dissected interviews. They broke down footage. They examined the ransom note like they were professionals. But the louder the public conversation became, the harder it was to separate fact from speculation. Some theories were reasonable. Some were twisted. Some were cruel, accusing a 9-year-old child of murder without any evidence. And once the internet labels someone a suspect, the stain never leaves. Burke Ramsey would grow up under a shadow he never asked for, a shadow based on nothing more than rumors, fragments, and imagination. Even as an adult, his rare interviews were analyzed frame by people who believed they could read guilt in the blink of an eye. But they were not investigators. They were spectators, treating a tragedy as entertainment. At the center of all this noise, the truth was suffocating, and what was left behind were questions that no one could answer. How did the killer navigate the house without waking anyone? Why choose such a dramatic note? Why leave the child inside if kidnapping was the motive? Why take the risk of staying long enough to stage something? Why was there no sign of forced entry? Why did the DNA tell such a faint, uncertain story? Why did the basement room seem both deliberately chosen and strangely out of place? Why did the autopsy reveal a blend of injury patterns that contradicted each other? Why did the timeline feel both obvious and impossible at the same time? Every why pulls the case apart a little more, and the answers that could have provided clarity were erased when the house filled with people, when the body was moved, when the evidence was touched. As time marched forward, JonBenet became less of a person in the public eye and more of a symbol of failure, a symbol of innocence lost, a symbol of the darkness that can hide behind the facade of a perfect family. But beneath all the theories and debates, the core story remains brutally simple. A child was murdered in her home, a child who should have been safe, a child whose last moments should have been wrapped in comfort, not fear. Her final hours remain a mystery. Whether she woke that night, whether she walked through the house, whether someone called her name, whether she cried, whether she understood what was happening. Those questions burn because they will likely never be answered. Investigators often say that victims speak through evidence, that their bodies, their surroundings, their injuries, all tell the story of what happened. But JonBenet's voice was silenced not only by the killer, but by the chaos that followed. The evidence that should have spoken for her was drowned by confusion. And so the house becomes the last place where her truth existed in pure form. But the house could not hold it. Decades later, when new detectives inherit the case, they face the same impossible maze. They review files, watch old interviews, reanalyze photographs. They hope to find something missed, but time is not kind to evidence. Time erases more than it reveals. Some investigators believe the answer is still there, buried in the contradictions. Others believe the case can never truly be solved because the most important clues were lost forever. But one thing unites them, the knowledge that this case should have been solved. It had all the makings of a solvable crime, a confined scene, a clear window of time, a limited group of potential suspects, physical evidence. Yet every advantage was destroyed in the first critical hours. It's not just a tragedy, it's a tragedy compounded by failure. The story of JonBenet Ramsey is the story of what happens when truth is fractured at the moment it's most vulnerable. When emotions overtake procedure, when media overtakes facts, when speculation overtakes science, when people with good intentions unintentionally destroy the very things needed to uncover the truth. And so her case sits frozen, not solved, not forgotten, but suspended. A mystery built on broken pieces, a crime that echoed louder than its evidence. A question that keeps circling back to the beginning. Who killed JonBenet Ramsey? The world still waits for the answer. But time is no longer giving it up willingly. The waiting is what makes this case unbearable. Waiting for someone to confess. Waiting for someone to remember a detail they had forgotten. Waiting for new technology to uncover something old evidence didn't show. Waiting for time to somehow reverse the damage done on that first morning. But time doesn't repair, it only erodes. What once were fresh traces become meaningless particles. What once were sharp memories become soft fragments. And what once was a living child becomes a name attached to one of the most publicized unsolved murders in American history. There is something profoundly heartbreaking about that transformation. A little girl should be remembered for her laughter, her routines, her drawings, her favorite toys, her dreams. Instead, JonBenet is remembered through autopsy reports, crime scene photos, interviews filled with suspicion, and debates that refuse to die. When people talk about her, they talk about theories, not the child behind the tragedy. They discuss handwriting, basement windows, DNA, garrots, ransom letters. They dive into the darker side of the story, forgetting the softer one. But buried beneath the controversy is a daughter, a sister, a friend. Someone who should have grown up. Someone who should have become something more than a cold case. The Ramsey family tried to rebuild their lives in the years that followed, but every step they took was shadowed by accusations. Whether innocent or guilty, they were never allowed to simply grieve. Public opinion followed them everywhere. Even after Patsy Ramsey passed away, her name was dragged into new documentaries, new theories, new analyses. Death did not free her from suspicion. John Ramsey remarried but remained under scrutiny, every gesture re-examined, every statement picked apart. Burke Ramsey grew into adulthood with a cloud that no child deserves. His rare appearances fueled more debate, more speculation. When he smiled nervously in an interview as an adult, the internet dissected that smile as if it were evidence. No one considered the possibility that smiling, even at the wrong time, is often nothing more than discomfort or anxiety. In the world of true crime, people often forget that families are made of real humans, not characters written into a story. They bleed, they break, they endure, and the Ramsey family endured far more than most people ever will, whether or not they carried any responsibility in what happened. Meanwhile, the theory of an intruder gained its own momentum. Some argued it was the only logical explanation given the DNA. Others pointed out that intruders rarely stage ransom notes inside the home, let alone 3-page ones written calmly. An intruder would not risk wandering through a house where parents were sleeping nearby. He would not take time to create a weapon from household items. He would not hide the body in a back room and then vanish without leaving a single clear trace. But there have been stranger crimes. There have been more bizarre intruders. There have been killers who stayed inside homes for hours without being detected. It is not impossible, only unlikely. And unlikely crimes do happen. The problem is that investigators need more than possibility. They need proof. Proof was the one thing that slipped away immediately. Years later, advanced DNA testing reached the point where smaller samples could be analyzed. There was hope that new testing might find something definitive, something that would tilt the scale clearly toward one suspect or one theory. But the samples were too contaminated, too degraded, too touched by too many hands. Technology can only do so much when the physical evidence is permanently corrupted. As testing evolved, the results remained ambiguous. The male DNA on her clothing was still inconclusive, still incomplete, still impossible to attribute with certainty. Each new round of analysis added more frustration. People asked why the case wasn't simply reopened from scratch. The answer is painful. You cannot restart something whose beginning is permanently broken. You can only pick up pieces that are already damaged. You can rearrange them, reinterpret them, re-examine them, but you cannot restore what vanished in those first chaotic hours. Modern investigators often study the Ramsey case as a lesson, a warning about what not to do. They examine the timeline of mistakes, the contamination, the lack of control. They use it to train new officers, teaching them how fragile a crime scene can be, how a single touched object can erase a killer's identity, how a single decision can unravel years of work, how every step must be calculated, not emotional. And yet, despite its failures, the case remains alive. Not in the courts, not in active investigation, but in public consciousness. People cannot let it go. They feel the injustice even if they don't know the victim personally. They feel the frustration even if they were not there. Because the image of a little girl found in her own home, mere feet away from her sleeping family, is too haunting to forget. Her story forces people to confront uncomfortable truths, that evil can hide behind normalcy, that tragedies can unfold in safe places, that danger sometimes comes not from strangers, but from the cracks within our systems, our assumptions, our trust in people. The most haunting part of the Ramsey case is how ordinary the beginning of that day should have been. A morning after Christmas, a time when families sleep in, when children play with their gifts, when parents drink coffee and enjoy the quiet after the storm of celebration. Instead, the Ramsey home filled with panic, confusion, and terror, the kind that no family could ever prepare for. Investigators often say the beginning of a case sets the tone for everything that follows. If the beginning is clean, the investigation has a chance. If the beginning is chaos, the truth becomes a distant possibility. And the Ramsey case began in chaos. People walked into rooms, touched doorknobs, sat on furniture, cleaned surfaces, moved objects, attempted to comfort Patsy, tried to help John. A well-meaning friend even turned off lights. Every movement, every instinctive act of compassion removed something that might have answered the question the world still asks. Who was in that house? Was it only the family? Was there someone else? The answer should have been obvious, but clarity drowned in footprints and fingerprints that should never have been there. As the years passed, some detectives confessed privately that they believed the case was no longer solvable, not because they lacked skill, nor because they lacked desire, but because they lacked evidence. The foundation had cracked, and every conclusion built on top of it was unstable. There were moments when the case seemed close to breaking open. A new test, a new witness, a new documentary, a new confession. Each spark lit a brief hope, but the flame always died out. Nothing ever reached the level of proof. And so the world sits with a case that is full of answers, but none that can be proven. A case where every piece of evidence is both helpful and meaningless. A case that is both simple and impossibly complex. The simplicity lies in the setting, a home, a short time frame, a small number of possible actors. The complexity lies in the interpretation, in the contradictions, the contamination, the conflicting expert opinions, the damaged timelines. The tragedy of JonBenet Ramsey is not only her death, it is the silence that followed. The silence filled by noise that drowned the truth. The silence created by mistakes no one can undo. The silence that deepened as years passed. Her case teaches us that justice is not guaranteed, even when the whole world is watching. That answers do not always come. That truth can be right in front of us and still slip away. Some believe the killer has already died. Others believe the killer is still alive, perhaps living quietly, perhaps carrying guilt, perhaps feeling nothing at all. Some believe the killer is someone the world has never suspected. Others believe the killer is someone the world has suspected too much. But belief is not justice. Justice requires evidence. Evidence requires preservation. Preservation requires control. Control was lost on the morning of December 26th, and once control is lost, truth rarely finds its way back. Yet every year the case resurfaces, journalists revisit it, podcasters analyze it, former detectives offer new theories, social media revives old debates. The story refuses to settle. It continues breathing, Not because new clues emerge, but because unanswered injustice never truly fades. People feel the weight of what should have been simple. They feel the wrongness of a case that went cold despite the resources behind it. They feel the heartbreak of a child whose final moments remain hidden behind confusion. Every story has an ending, but some endings are not endings at all. They are voids. John Bonet's story ends in that void. There are no final answers, no confirmed suspect, no courtroom victory, no closure, only questions, only theories, only fragments, only a 6-year-old girl whose future never came, whose truth was lost in the very place that should have protected it. And so her case remains what it has always been. A reminder that justice is fragile. A reminder that the smallest mistakes can destroy the biggest truths. A reminder that the world sometimes fails the people who need it most. JonBenet Ramsey's case isn't unsolved because the killer was brilliant. It is unsolved because the system broke. And in that broken space, behind the walls of that house, in the shadows of that basement room, the truth remains, silent, unreachable, and forever out of the world's grasp.